Okay, you guys, so we're going to talk about the last two Progressive era presidents, and they include William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson. So let's talk about Taft first. He is the one that immediately comes after Teddy Roosevelt, and he is known for getting stuck in the bathtub, which is actually a book, if you can see that. That is the cover of a book about it. So the sad part is, you guys, is that Taft actually did have some accomplishments throughout his lifetime, including being the only person to serve in all three branches of the federal government. He was obviously president. He was the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court, and he also served in Congress. But of course, all that people remember is the stinking bathtub. So who is he? First of all, he is handpicked by Roosevelt to be sort of his successor. He is a progressive in the Republican Party. And so Roosevelt is like, I like my odds with Taft. I think he's going to be great. But unfortunately, that really doesn't pan out. Taft never even really likes being president. He kind of becomes president because outside influence. His wife wants him to become president. And obviously Roosevelt, but he always feels like he's kind of in Teddy Roosevelt's shadow a little bit, and doesn't take on the presidency as his own. And even though Roosevelt is known or nicknamed the Trust Buster, it is actually Taft who ends up busting a ton of trust in his 4 years in office. In fact, 90 trusts were split apart under his presidency. So he, while is not nicknamed the Trust Buster, actually accomplished more in that department than Teddy Roosevelt. And he just doesn't have the same personality or persona as Roosevelt. I mean, he's not this larger than life character, even though he is quite large. His personality is not that. He's not aggressive. He's not like a go and get 'em kind of guy. He's just more reserved and more conservative. And so the Payne-Aldrich tariff is something that he is known for. It is a tariff that was passed, and we know that a tariff is a tax on imports. And Taft runs on the idea of lowering tariffs in general. That's his whole platform. But when he gets into office, he finds that it's more difficult than he thought. And so he doesn't actually end up lowering tariffs, or he barely does, I guess I should say, and in some cases actually raises them. So progressives within his party, and that shouldn't say party, that should say he's a traitor to the progressives within the Republican Party. So sorry about that typo. We'll just cross that out. He was a traitor to progressives who always fought to lower tariffs. And so that just didn't happen under Taft. And so Roosevelt was part of the progressives in the Republican Party as well. And so this is him glaring at Taft like, what are you doing? You need to lower tariffs. And Taft is begging this congressman to pass the law through the legislature to lower tariffs. And it does not get done. Okay, so here's some drama for you. So Taft appoints Richard A. Ballinger as the Secretary of his Interior. And what Ballinger does is he disapproved of conservation, and he took 1 million acres off the reserved list that Roosevelt worked so hard to achieve. So if you remember, Roosevelt set aside land that could not be built on and had to be preserved, as is. And so the Secretary of Interior Ballinger takes 1 million acres off that list. And so that means that that land could be built on, industrialized, whatever. So a muckraker article comes out, which, remember, those are the journalists that are going to try to expose problems in society. They accuse Ballinger of letting businesses exploit natural resources in those areas. So not only is he taking the land away, he's allowing big business in there to profit off the land. So the drama is that Gifford Pinchot, who was the head of the U.S. Forest Service under Roosevelt and continues to be under Taft, defends the muckraker and not Taft. And rightfully so. I mean, Gifford if you recall, worked with Roosevelt to get that land conserved. And so he does not want to see it taken away and off that list. And so he just defends the muckraker. And so Taft supports Ballinger and fires Pinchot. And so this does not go over very well when Roosevelt finds out, so much so that he is going to come back from his trip from Africa, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So there you go. Big drama in the White House at that time. So Roosevelt is hearing all of these things that are happening, the lack of tariffs being lowered, the firing of Pinchot. And so the progressives within the Republican Party start to split on the issues. You know, they kind of take, are they going to be like a Roosevelt or are they going to be like a Taft? So who are they going to support? And Roosevelt comes back from Africa, and he is actually going to run for president again in 1912 for a third term, okay? And he's going to run under a new party because the Republicans already have Taft, okay? So he is going to run in his own party called the Bull Moose Party, which is what that video was talking about, him getting shot. He's like, you can't take down a bull moose. So he forms his own party, and this is the idea. The new nationalism is sort of the motto, the pledge, the policy that he's going to take on. Sort of this new patriotism, this new, new, more progressive approach. And we're going to highlight mudslinging as well, because this is one of the first elections that we're actually going to see two candidates insulting each other openly. And the public and writing about it in newspapers. So Taft calls Roosevelt a dangerous egotist. So basically he's full of himself. But my favorite is the response. Roosevelt calls Taft a fathead brain of a guinea pig. So obviously a little different than how people get insulted today. But that's called mudslinging, or throwing the mud at the other candidate. Like I'm throwing insults. So you can bring that one back for slang if you want. So there you go. They're going to blows. They're fighting. Okay. They're both running for president. Okay. So they split the vote between the Republican Party. And that allows, because they split the vote, that allows the Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, to win. So because Taft and Teddy ran against each other, that allowed Wilson to win. And if you can see, he wins in all of these blue states. And I'm sorry, the highlighter's still there. The blue states went to Wilson because Taft or Roosevelt could not get a majority there because they're splitting the votes. Okay. And you could see Taft only won 2 states. Okay. So yeek. Okay. Taft was not well liked at the end of his presidency. So Woodrow Wilson comes into office. So let's talk a little bit about him. Okay. First of all, Woodrow Wilson is from the South. He is from Virginia. And to give you a little bit of background, his parents were both supporters of the Confederate side in the Civil War. So they were supporters of the South. So it's not surprising that Woodrow Wilson has some racist views, because that is how and where he grew up. And so we'll get to that. But he is a lawyer. He is a history professor, and he eventually becomes president of Princeton. He then becomes governor of New Jersey. And then running for president, he attacks the trust, just like Roosevelt did. He attacks tariffs, just like the progressive did, and high finance, so big banking. So under Woodrow Wilson, he does pass the Underwood Tariff, which the progressives in the Republican Party would appreciate. It's a huge decrease in tariffs. So big business will not benefit from that. So they are going to try to work against it. And it is under Wilson, my friends, that we get the federal income tax, which means that a portion of our paychecks to this day go to the federal government. And the more money you make, the more money you pay in taxes. And this is the main source of government income even today. This is how they pay for a lot of things that, need paying for. Infrastructure, war, whatever. Okay, it's the main source of the government's income. So it's Wilson that comes up with the federal income tax. He also developed something called the Federal Reserve Act, or the Fed. And this has to do with banking, you guys, because he wanted to manage and make banking more efficient in the United States. So the U.S. was divided into 12 different banking districts, and each district has its own regional bank. Okay, and that regional Federal Reserve Bank, so there are 12, could loan money to smaller banks within the district. So the pros of this are it's a more stable banking system, and it allows for less panics, which means there are less economic issues like a depression or a recession. They could also influence interest rates on loans so they don't get too high or low. And it also establishes a national currency, which didn't exist prior to this. So there were all different kinds of currencies being used within the United States. And the Federal Reserve allows for one currency to be used across the entire United States. The cons to this, or some consider the Fed to be invasive and it's unconstitutional because it's not legitimately written in the Constitution. And some say it helps businesses over the public. So it helps business over the people. Regardless, Woodrow helps to get that passed. And it is the way our banking system is set up today. Ways that he is not progressive. He is known as a racist. He allows cabinet members within the White House to segregate their offices, okay? He opposed anti-lynching legislation. So there was acts or laws that were going to ban lynching. And he says no. Now his justification is he said that each state should decide on their own, okay? He didn't want to create a national law. And while he was president of Princeton, he did not allow any black students to attend. So he was very stuck in his way. That's that white Southern sort of Confederate upbringing that shaped his thinking. All right, last slide is talks about Woodrow and antitrust laws. So just like Roosevelt and just like Taft, Woodrow Wilson was against trusts, okay? And so he helped to pass this law, the Clayton Antitrust Act, that says a company could not buy stock of another company if it led to a monopoly. So basically allowing monopolies to not form. He said that labor unions had the right to exist, so that's good for the workers. And strikes and protests are absolutely illegal if they are not a threat to the public. So if they don't hurt the public in terms of the economy or straight up hurt the public. And then the Federal Trade Commission Act is passed, which says that it creates a group that is going to investigate any company who may be in violation of federal regulations, including this Clayton Antitrust Act. So they could require reports from different companies to make sure they were following regulations, and 400 cease and desist orders, which means they have to stop 400 stop work now, or companies can't work anymore, was made because of this act, because companies were not following the federal regulations. So Wilson is progressive in terms of business and antitrust. He is progressive in terms of tariffs. He is not so much progressive in terms of civil rights, which none of them are, if you noticed. We didn't even talk about Taft. But they all sort of fit into this category as being progressive presidents during the progressive era. Okay? All right, guys, make sure you get those guided notes filled in, and then go ahead and move on to the Roosevelt and Taft political cartoon worksheet. All right? All right, we'll see you next week.